She knew what she was doing was wrong. She had known the moment she saw him. But love didn't care about what side of a wall you were on, even if she was on the side of the palace gardens and he was stood in the ruined fields. The war had gone on for years, but it only took a moment for her to lose to his eyes. They stared at her through a hole in the wall. She knew he was from the other side. He had the eyes of the others, the enemies. They were so bright that she could see her reflection in them. They came together the night before the end of the war. He sneaked through the back entrance of the palace and found every door in his path unlocked. The corridors led up through the wooden intestines of the place, right up one of the spiny towers, into the princess's bedroom and into her heart. The announcement of defeat came at midday. Soldiers had invaded the palace at night, finding the doors unlocked, and surrounded the king and his wife in their beds. They were killed like pigs, and the princess was brought kicking and crying before the winners. Her lover was nowhere to be seen, and in his place stood a thin, tall man with a moustache like a rat's tail and a smile like a snake's tongue. A nobleman, one of the greatest of his kingdom. He was to marry her and bring together their peoples after the war. She could not refuse, but she could rebel. That night, when the palace grounds were silent except for the crying of the cicadas, she sneaked out the window. They had taken care to remove anything from her room that she might hurt herself with, but they had not removed her nails. They were long and beautiful and strong. She stabbed them into the wood, climbing down into the gardens. She wandered along the paths, hiding in the shadow of trees, until a warm hand pulled her into the bushes. "Your fingers are bleeding," he said, looking at her ruined nails. "It is only a bit of blood. Love is worth a bit of pain." Their second night together was twice as passionate as the first, but they were so lost in each other's eyes that they did not see the guards approaching. They were dragged into the palace, and the sleepy nobleman was brought before them, dressed in red silk pyjamas. His snake-like smile had turned poisonous. "Burn them both at sunset tomorrow." The princess was locked inside her room. She cried and screamed and begged. Eventually, the nobleman came in, and she fell silent. "I know you are hopeless. Your parents are both dead. I cannot forgive you for what you did, but nobody deserves to die alone. I will allow you to see one person tonight, aside from him." She thought for a moment and then said, "The old woman who lives alone several streets from here. She is called Doc Rack, and she has always been like a grandmother to me." So they brought the old woman before her, who was really a witch. "Doc Rack, you must help me. Tonight they will burn me and my lover. Please, use your magic so that we may live." Doc Rack agreed, and in exchange for her help, took the princess's fingernails. They were bent and broken, but the witch insisted. The next day, they had built a great wooden construction in the palace gardens to burn the princess and her lover on. She was tied to it, but her lover was nowhere to be found. She heard whispers around her. It sounded like he had escaped. Her heart was filled with joy, but also fear. For if he was not here, he would not be protected by the witch's spell. Doc Rack, waiting for the man, did not begin her spell until the fire had already been lit. She whispered the words quickly, but the princess had already started crying in pain. Her skin turned red, and her hair curled up, and the witch spoke as fast as she could. Just when it looked like the princess would die, she disappeared. The crowd cried out. The fire was put out, and the palace guards searched everywhere for the princess, but she had completely vanished. The witch smiled and returned home. The princess's lover had escaped in the morning. The men guarding him drunk themselves into a stupor, overjoyed with their victory, and fell asleep. He turned away from the city and didn't look back. He ran until he found a horse, and then he rode. He tried to forget about the woman's eyes and his own guilt as he imagined her burning to death, alone. Eventually, he reached an inn where he was confident they would not have heard of him. He begged for room and board in return for labour, and the innkeeper agreed. He drank until he forgot about the fire. Before climbing into bed, he went outside to relieve himself. "My dear." He swore and turned around. It was quiet, but he was sure he had heard a voice. A woman's voice. "Come closer." Eventually, he made out a shape in the darkness, but there was something wrong with it. "Who's there?" "It's me." His heart stopped. It was the princess. "Do you still love me?" she said. Of course." He fell forward and reached out with his hand. He still couldn't see her properly, but he held her, and she felt warm. Far too warm. He pulled away his hand, and it was wet with blood. "It is only a bit of blood," she said. "I don't understand. How did you escape?" He could see her eyes now, shining in the darkness. Behind him, the innkeeper approached, carrying a torch, and slowly he began to see the princess. The man screamed and fell to the ground. He scratched at his eyes, but he could not remove the image. Before him, she floated in the air. Her black hair was still long and beautiful, and her face was like a china doll, but the rest of her body was gone. Trailing from her neck was her spine, and underneath it a beating heart. Intestines hung below, waving in the night breeze. She smiled at him. "What's wrong, dear? It is only a bit of blood. Love is worth a bit of pain." The last thing he saw was those eyes, and the last thing he felt was the beating of her heart pressed against his chest.